Good morning and good afternoon to our audience around the world. Welcome to the Latin America and Caribbean Regional Session for the Brigham Young University 2021 International Symposium on Law and Religion. The topic for this session is Collaborative Solutions to Promote Religious Freedom, or Freedom of Religion or Belief. My name is Gary Doxey. I am a history and law professor at Brigham Young University and associate director of the International Center for the Study of Law and Religion. I'm pleased to moderate this session today. It's an honor to introduce our distinguished panelists as well. First, we welcome Elena López from Argentina. She is a professor of law at the Catholic University of Argentina and at the Austral University, and is responsible for religion and development at the Regional Ecumenical Center for Counseling and Service, or CREAS. For many years, Elena has been involved in interfaith and ecumenical movements for the good of society and sustainable development. She's participated in numerous international meetings as a speaker and has published several academic articles in the field of law and religion. We also welcome Astrid Ríos from Guatemala. She is Vice President and Executive Director of Asociación La Familia Importa, or AFI. AFI is one of the most respected organizations in Central America that promotes the family, the right to life, and religious freedom. She has participated on radio, television, and speaking engagements and trainings at the national level and international symposiums. She works continuously in different public spheres and even in the Congress of the Republic, the OAS, and the United Nations. Throughout all her work, Astrid and AFI are an example of collaboration, always seeking to work with other organizations that, although might not agree with them on everything, share many of the same basic values. Finally, we are grateful for the presence of our great friend and colleague, José Antonio Calvi from Peru. He is a legal advisor to the Peruvian Episcopal Conference. He has been practicing law in Peru for many years and doing academic research in the field of law concerning religious organizations. He has been involved in conferences at the international level as well. He is the current president of the Latin American Consortium for Religious Freedom. The Consortium is a professional association of distinguished professors, practitioners, and leaders from throughout Latin America who study the issue of religious freedom. In addition to thanking Dr. Calvi for his participation today, I would like to thank the Latin American Consortium itself, which he chairs, as the Consortium is one of this session's sponsors. This session will take the form of a discussion among the panelists in which they will answer a series of questions on the theme of the session. Let's start with a general question for everyone. Well, you have a lot of knowledge about religious freedom, and indeed, you are experts within your regions. So, could you comment on the status of religious freedom in Latin America, or in your country, or in the region? And maybe what would be the successes or challenges that we face today? Please, go ahead. Thank you, Gary. Indeed, in Peru, since 2010, as you know, the Religious Freedom Law was enacted and approved, a bill that had taken a long time, a lot of work and development to come to fruition by the most important churches and confessions that exist in Peru. Faiths, I should say. After several failed attempts in 2010, the Religious Freedom Law was promoted. It was achieved, and since then, I would say that basically, there have been many successes in the defense and development of this fundamental right. Before 2010, the Catholic Church had, as you know, had signed a concordat with the Holy See and Peru in 1980. And there was quite a particular legal regimen that the rest of the religious confessions or faiths were claiming, and rightly so. In terms of the law, a series of rights were practically harmonized, and we would say that in most fields, this was implemented successfully. One of the issues that has not developed as we would like is the signing of agreements between religious denominations and the state. But this is a matter that we're going to touch on later on. The only concern that we have at this moment is that with a new government in Peru since last July 28th, there are some voices asking for a change in the constitutional text. In fact, some years ago already, there were a couple of bills seeking to turn Peru into a country with a secularist text at the constitutional level. When we consider that the current text allows the development of religious freedom through a positive variety of secularism, that is what I would say we seek out. Peru is a secular country and has been since 1980. And different faiths have united quite a lot in recent years, fighting hand in hand against bills that in some way, shape, or form attempted to attack ethical principles and values for these different faiths. So, I would say that I believe we are in a moment of success rather than upheaval. But as we always have to say, right, there is still a lot to do. There's a lot of work to be done. Thank you very much, Elena. Yes, thank you very much, Gary. Well, in the region for Latin America, particularly in recent years, uh, there's been a good amount of progress with some religious freedom policies, as is the case of Colombia with its policy on the contribution of religious actors, also in what is the peace process and its religious freedom policy. And I believe that in that sense, there is still a challenge for the region when it comes to cooperating and generating mechanisms for South South cooperation in terms of religious freedom policies, how governments manage religious affairs. I don't believe that there are many different experiences, at least within our region, that we can get feedback from or identify good best practices, not for the management of religious affairs from government experience, I should say. Some years ago, there was an approach between Argentina and Colombia, but today, religious freedom, especially in recent years, has been the victim of certain attacks of intolerance. There's been attacks on places of worship and images of religious symbols. This has grown in recent years. It's not just isolated acts. And I believe that there is a challenge concerning, a sort of questioning, a concern about the understanding and the comprehension of what a secular state means, how secularism is understood. In that sense, I think that there are differences in terms of how secularity is understood within the state and how this relationship of the state with religious organizations can be. I think that the different religious organizations have a lot to contribute as well, and when it comes to collaborating. Well, as Gary said, I currently live in Guatemala. We are living through the same thing as everyone else, which is a massive event, the pandemic, which has forced us to reflect on certain issues. One of those is individual rights, including religious freedom. As has been the case for example, in all countries, there are certain restrictions that force us to put our freedom aside. And now we've realized how religious freedom is something that we don't pay attention to enough. I don't know how it might be in other regions, in South America or Europe, but until we see the restriction, we don't realize the importance of freedom. There's an analogy that I really like and that I think I understand from my own experience now, and it is that until we become parents, we don't really care about parenting issues or parenting matters, for example. But once we become parents, we want to soak up as much knowledge as we possibly can to do the job well. And I think that the same thing happens here for the state of religious freedom in our region. We don't really see any direct threats at the moment. We do see certain restrictions on our rights. For example, we see that we can't have physical gatherings at our places of worship, that there is limited seating, so we can't worship. We can't take communion in the same way that we did before. And there are different religions. There's such a variety of religions that each one has its challenges. But at the end of the day, it comes back to an individual right that we're seeing restricted by the government. And so now the need arises for us, I believe, to train ourselves in the subject of religious freedom, give it the importance it deserves, and start to defend this individual right that we have as individuals, right? So it is important that as a region and as citizens, we are able to demand respect for this right, which, as I was saying, maybe we see things on the news about what's going on currently in Afghanistan, and we get scared and we say, no, there's no religious freedom there. But that's an extreme that comes from coercion or restriction of religious freedom. And anyone can reach that extreme if we don't stand up for our individual rights and understand the nature of human rights like religious freedom. Perfect. Thank you. You all mentioned secularism. We can ask about, we can go into this topic of secularism. I think the whole hemisphere is talking about secularism right now. How do you see this? What is the trend going to be in Latin America? Is it towards a kind of secularism, or is it towards a secular state with positive secularism? What do you see? What is the trend in the region? There are currently several constitutional projects in Bolivia, in Peru, Chile, where I would point to a negative secularism. We promote positive secularism, which is to say that a secular state allows the exercise of all the recognized religious faiths, which each individual in their particular and collective way can freely exercise the right of religious freedom. And modern secularism seeks the opposite. It seeks to eliminate from constitutional texts and public practice any act that has to do with religion. And that is nothing more than ignoring history, because Latin America has a very rich religious history. From its origins, before the arrival of Spanish or Portuguese colonialism, all Latin American peoples lived in a context of deep popular religiosity. Later, with the arrival of the Spanish and the Portuguese to the American continents, the Catholic Church took on a fundamental and official role. However, our peoples are religious. They are religious, and in Peru, along the coasts, the highlands, and the jungles, people collectively practice different rites and worship like their ancestors did. And it is quite difficult, it's very difficult to separate the religious from the dignity of a human being in Latin America. Therefore, these tendencies, more of a political order of wanting to eliminate that which is sacred, that which is religious from the public sphere, sort of goes against the naturalness and the original religiosity of our Latin American peoples. As someone mentioned earlier, in terms of religious freedom, no one is left out. We all have something to say. We all have a lot to say, even those who don't believe in anything. Atheism is also part of religious freedom. That's why I, personally, am concerned about these new political tendencies, because they want to go against this positive secularism of recognition, or recognizing a secular state, allowing all religious faiths to have freedom of association, of worship, of development of their activities, right? And those who do not believe in anything at all, well, they also have the right to their conscience and their opinion. They can exercise that freely. But if we were to take a census today in Latin American countries, we're going to find that the overwhelming majority of people believe in God, in some God, and therefore eliminating spirituality or religiosity from the public sphere of a Latin American country seems to me to be just plain wrong. It's something that goes against the very dignity of the person in terms of their freedom. Thank you. One other comment with respect to secularism or the trends that we're experiencing. Of course, uh, I don't think that it's a trend. I think it's the rule in how we can misunderstand religious freedom. I really like analogies quite a bit, so I'm going to use them a lot. But I came to understand this, and this was an easy way to digest this idea. And it's looking at a pendulum, where there are two extremes that it swings to. Uh, there's a confessional state, there's a religious state, for example, that can restrict the religious freedom of others. And then there's the secularist state, which is at the other extreme of what we are looking for, which is a secular state, with a healthy separation between church and state, for neutrality by the state and neutrality by the church, in that they are occupying different spheres. However, there's this radical position of secularism, where we are precisely attacking religious freedom by trying to, or in order to try and reach a sort of false secular state. So, this restriction of freedom through a false separation between church and state is what we are witnessing here. For example, in our country, a if a public official or a head of government or someone who's holding some kind of public office makes any reference to their faith, they're automatically censored. And then they say, no, these things can't mix. People can even make rhymes and riddles about it. Church and state, gotta keep them separate, etc. But at the same time, something that happens a lot in Guatemala is that these follow political lines and agendas. So, for example, the same groups that are saying that you have to separate church and state, when they see that they need a protest from the church for their political gain, they demand it. And then when there's a protest from a church that goes against them, they censor it. So we can see there how there's an imbalance, and the pendulum keeps swinging and swinging. And what we need to find is that middle ground, and that comes with respect for religious freedom. Yes, I also agree in part with José, in the sense that there have been there have been acts with a negative connotation directed towards the religious factor, especially assuming or presuming that religion or the religious factor is detrimental to the development of human dignity. In that sense, I believe that these are movements that are gaining greater visibility in the public sphere and question this exact idea of secularity of the state. Each country also presents, due to its history, as José said, a very particular relationship that, starting from a neutrality of the state, we had seen for some years with tendencies where the policies implemented a sort of promotion of plurality of religious actors themselves, of the religious diversity within a country. And nowadays, we could say that these policies have, in a certain way, slowed down the promotion of religious freedom policies in many countries where there were projects, as here in Argentina, that have been stopped. So in that sense, I believe that there is a debate that is also being put forward by other types of laws that have been proposed, even though, in Argentina, we've recently had, let's say, the approval of the adoption of the abortion law, where religious actors supported the law and other actors were against it. So you can see the religious diversity. In that sense, the positions aren't all going to swing the same way amongst religious organizations. So there's a complexity to these public debates, and we need to see what the role of the government is in that sense, how they introduce and give rise to these debates, and how they act, which is key when these debates are held, these debates which are so important to society, where people are defining at any given point the life and human dignity. Thank you very much. So we've already touched upon this topic of collaboration. You've mentioned the importance of collaboration in defending religious freedom and educating people on the social work of religion as well. Collaboration is important. Could you tell us now about your experience, any effective collaboration that you may have seen? Could you tell us something that you could teach us about the importance, both the importance of collaboration in the area of defending religious freedom, and in other senses, in other ways, the importance and how it works? What would the best practices be? Can you give us some guidelines, please? Maybe. Yes, so the truth is that it's been a lot of hard work, mostly because we need to find the common value for everyone, and that's been the key. Right now, I can't call it a success story yet, because it is still just a bill. However, I would like to I would like to call it a success story because the collaboration between the different religious groups has been unprecedented. We, with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and AFI, started to draft a bill. I can still remember perfectly when Gary was here in Guatemala and presented us with a bill as a draft of what existed in other legislations, and we started working on the project. And that draft was presented to the legislative body with the support of not one, but all the majority religions, all the major religions that are present in Guatemala. And there was actually such acceptance within the religious sector that they had to give in, and they had to recognize the right to religious freedom, and that it is not based on whether or not I agree with what someone else believes. It's based on the human dignity of that person and the right that comes with religious freedom for the simple fact of being a human being, basically. And so we could see how, if we put doctrinal differences aside and focus on what unites us, the common value of our dignity, and the right to religious freedom, we can move forward to such an extent that the bill was actually put before the representatives. Now the legislative process has to continue. We, as a civil society organization, are outside of that legislative process in terms of the decision making. But it's key that civil society organizations and religious leaders are able to come together to communicate their needs and also to understand the needs of others. We saw, for example, amongst the biggest challenges, the ignorance to how others live their faith. I don't know if it's something that happens in other regions, but we know very little about minority religions, or, for example, even major religions that simply are different from our own. So, if we were able to have that open dialogue where the basis is dignity and respect for other people and their beliefs, we could advance in terms of the protection of all. And I really like the way BYU presents this, and I've heard it at, I think, in almost all of the conferences that you've ever given us, saying, I don't agree with you, but I will defend that you have the right to believe in what you want to believe in. Because if we see someone else's right being restricted, in this case, the religious freedom of some religion, whether a major or minor religion, that's affecting me directly because it is the same individual right. And then we see this case of success, of cooperation, which is reflected in a bill that tries to protect a right that is already, in our case in Guatemala, legislated by the political constitution, which I guess you could say is our highest level of lawmaking, but which is not developed. And then this cooperation among us all allows us to develop the protection of the right, to be ahead of the times, to try not to reach the extremes that we have seen in other countries. I'm sure that you in the United States have had greater challenges in terms of threats to religious freedom than we have had in Guatemala. But that's where we're headed if we don't have comprehensive protection, complete protection. The cooperation of different regions, I think Guatemala could be a pioneer country. It could lead by example in terms of cooperation and what putting differences aside and finding the common value can achieve. As I was saying, in terms of religious freedom, we know that there are certain details that still have to be fine-tuned, and that's up to the legislative work of our elected officials. But as civil society and religious leaders, there is a bridge between us, and there is a recognition of the need that we have for each other, and the dignity that we all urgently need to protect and that we need to preserve. Well, I mentioned that one of the challenges that Peru has at the moment is the series of agreements between religious denominations and the state. It's achieving that. Today, the only recognized religious faith that has an agreement with the state is the Catholic Church through the Concordat of 1980. However, it is important for society to understand that religious denominations are not only dedicated to worship and prayer. Religious denominations generally provide a very high level of social aid. It's in their very nature. Some with different characteristics, others with characteristics that are common to others. But every religious entity, at the end of the day, is an entity that seeks solidarity and social purpose. It's part of its own nature, and people don't know this. In Peru, particularly, we've lived through a terrible COVID pandemic. Peru is the country with the highest number of deaths officially as compared to its population. It's the fifth or sixth country in the world in cases of COVID deaths. Officially, we are currently sitting at 200,000 people recognized to have died from COVID, but clearly there are many more. And during this pandemic, religious entities have collaborated a lot with the state on social issues, not only in in food programs and in all that has to deal with the health aspect, in providing spiritual and religious support to the families of the thousands and thousands of people in mourning who have been left behind as a result of the pandemic, but real programs of direct help to the state, those have also been generated. I can only speak about what I've seen. The Catholic Church, through the Peruvian Episcopal Conference with its program Respira Peru, has delivered to the state dozens of oxygen plants that the government could not afford during the pandemic. And people were dying for lack of oxygen. And an oxygen tank cost in Peru approximately $2,000, an oxygen tank. And frankly, when you put that into perspective and you ask yourself how many deaths could have been avoided with a policy of direct collaboration from the beginning. And that comes through agreements. I know of many religious denominations, such as the Adventists and the evangelical communities, which have also helped a great deal in education, in food, health education, for example, in the poorest parts of the country. And people don't know that. But if there had been agreements signed with the state, this could have been attacked from the beginning. And as just to repeat, many deaths would have been avoided. Thank you. Then collaboration in the social role of religion and government, right? Collaboration can be incredibly helpful. And thank you very much for sharing that experience, which was really phenomenal. Elena, what do you think? What do you think about interfaith collaboration? Let's talk about collaboration between organizations as well. So the truth is, just as José was saying, we're in the middle of a pandemic context, and this is a key moment where religious organizations at all different levels have also started collaborating, not just collaborating to attend to people's needs, but to collaborate together. This is not something that came about with the pandemic alone. There are many gaps and inequalities in Latin America. So there were certain mechanisms at the regional level in place previously. For example, the Interreligious Alliance for Sustainable Development, the 2030 Agenda. That's a mechanism, a platform that many actors participate on, such as Caritas, Latin America, CREAS as well, Religions for Peace, among other organizations, Motivation, where they have or can collaborate together on some initiatives to try to have an impact on the high-level political forum or for the follow-up and monitoring of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In that regard, I'll also share with you an experience we had here in Argentina some 2 years ago. I was collaborating on a report on the contribution of religious organizations to sustainable development. Being able to measure the contribution of some organizations here in Argentina, such as AMIA, which is a very important organization from the Jewish community with a national scope, and Caritas Argentina as well. There was also Islam for Peace, the Islam for Peace Institute, and other religious organizations such as the Salvation Army. There were more than 14 or 15 organizations that were able to and accepted contributing to this report, and we were able to measure how their programs and their actions contribute to the development objectives. those goals. In that sense, religions and religious actors operate in a certain way, however, that sometimes is not measurable. This is not exactly where we want to measure and have metrics for everything. There's a value that's difficult to quantify, which is the contribution to social cohesion, as they also promote the generation of or the creation of relationships, fraternal relationships, which come from which stem from a religious belief. And religious belief is so intrinsic to the human person that this is precisely the motivation to be able to go out to heal the wounds that we may find in our societies today. And I think that that's something that we need to keep in mind whenever we seek to collaborate. How people from different religions can motivate each other to collaborate, to go out together to cover and heal these wounds in our societies. I think that that has great potential. Thank you very much. And I think we increase our ability if we collaborate with others, right? We're able to do more. That's something that we're looking at within ourselves at the center. And so, with respect to collaboration in defense of religious freedom, what have you seen? Is it, I think it's important. I think that we can all understand that religious freedom belongs to everyone. It does not pertain to any one creed or any one religion. It's something that belongs to everybody. So, how have you seen successes, or how have you seen challenges arise within collaboration in defense of religious freedom? Yes, that is a fundamental issue. I would start talking about this issue by mentioning that, for example, in Peru, the only ones that can't give their opinion, or the only ones that do not have freedom of expression to say what they think, are religious entities. When a religious entity speaks, gives an opinion on any moral or social issue, the whole of the press attacks them. And how should we say this? I guess they brand them as entities talking about things that are beyond religion. And religious entities have the same right to an opinion and the same right of expression as any other group. However, in Latin America, and particularly in Peru, apparently, they're the only entities that cannot express what they think or how they feel. People individually will determine if they agree or disagree on any particular topic, but just the right to express their opinion should be the starting point for establishing a position on certain political and social issues that they consider to be of particular interest. In that sense, and getting to the point, I think that a consensus among religious entities is fundamental, and interreligious collaboration on certain topics to make known not only to the state from the political point of view, but to society in general through the media, this this capacity, what they think about any particular topic and why. There's a lot of misinformation, and often people don't want to talk about this topic. They don't want to talk about this subject because they fear it's going to be poorly received. It's fundamental. It's basic that the religious faiths have dialogue, interreligious dialogue, that will generate a series of guidelines, a roadmap, if you will, to establish through agreements with the state a closed defense of religious freedom. We defend it amongst ourselves, all of us who believe in it, or what is happening in other countries is going to happen, where they're practically going all the way to the other extreme, to negative secularism, avoiding religious matters from being addressed in public. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we have to face in what's left of these decades. And thank you. Another comment? Yes, I think that we need to deepen. The challenge is to deepen what we understand and what we mean by religious freedom, in the sense that religious freedom is that right which protects that such an intimate conviction within a human person, the belief that is then made manifest in acts of worship in public, but it's a right that really molds human consciousness. So I think it's something that protects all of humankind, regardless of whether they believe in something or not. So I think that there is a challenge, the challenge of better understanding what the right to religious freedom means, which not only protects religious people or religious communities. And from there, I think that we should also mention that if there is an act of hostility against any religious group, then that's an act of hostility against me as well. There is no justification. There needs to be a sense of solidarity. And to speak about Argentina, there is great solidarity among religious organizations when some violent act is committed against a particular community. There are always expressions of solidarity, statements of solidarity from one to the other. And in that sense, this also strengthens this petition for protection whenever necessary. But I think that there's a great challenge there in understanding what this is freedom of religion, because sometimes nowadays I think that there's great emphasis on religion having become irrelevant somehow. So I think we have to say, well, this right to religious freedom is a fundamental right for human people, for human beings. Why? Because this is an intimate conviction, and how we manifest that, how we materialize that, must be guaranteed and secured. Yes, and it protects both the rights of believers and non-believers. Yes, Jose? And I wanted to share an additional comment. This year marks the 40th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and of Discrimination Based on Religion or Belief. 40 years ago, the member states of the United Nations decided, as something that would be fundamental to world peace and to societal development, that the matter of religious freedom was an inherent part of the development of society itself, in search of peace, tolerance, putting a stop to discrimination in all its forms. Today, it seems that this has no value whatsoever. In other words, 40 years have gone by, and the right has become obsolete. I think it should be the opposite. A lot of progress has been made over the last 40 years since the Declaration. Today, in our Latin American countries, we have real religious freedom. There are countries that have enacted laws of religious freedom, specifically in the case of Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Chile. And religious freedom is recognized in most, if not all, constitutions in some way, shape, or form. And this declaration from 40 years ago makes it so that this year should be recognized. There should be special recognition for it. There are always things that can be improved, but it's important to read through the reasoning behind the articles in the Declaration. And I would like to highlight this quest for world peace. Member states recognize that working on religious freedom helps world peace and social peace. It helps us to be people who can demonstrate a true peaceful coexistence, even with those who do not believe. Like Elena says, religious freedom protects everyone, those who believe, those who do not believe, and it's important not to lose sight of the fact that the world 40 years ago signed on to this as the route to follow for worldwide social benefit. Thank you very much. We can continue. We also have to think, I believe, of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which 73 years ago, something like that, was adopted almost unanimously by all nations. At the beginning of the United Nations, and in that declaration, religious freedom is very much emphasized among other rights that stand out as fundamental to the human race. And those rights were adopted on the basis of a principle, a universal value, which is the value of human dignity, universal and mutual in every human being. And so I wonder, as we were saying, the convention or the declaration from 40 years ago is starting to be forgotten. That fundamental value, I think that is also being forgotten. This universal human dignity, which is equal and reciprocal for everyone. So could you tell us how a shared understanding of this equal human dignity of all could contribute to successful collaboration? Well, in addition, Gary, to what you just mentioned, that allows us to humanize the other person. Uh, it sounds a little redundant. How do you humanize the other person? But we tend to dehumanize that which is different from us because it allows us to act as anything but human beings. I don't know if maybe I'm explaining myself all that well. But for example, if I can see in the other person a human being and recognize dignity with rights in them, I can overcome theological differences or differences of faith. That's to say, I will respect you because you are a human being, because of the dignity that you possess. And the difference that you and I might have in terms of faith, we're going to leave that aside because we want to go for something else, something greater, which is your respect and my respect for the beliefs of others. It's key that we not lose focus on how when we talk about religious freedom, we're talking about human beings. And so their right is just as important as mine, and the restriction of their right is a restriction on mine. So that allows us to think as a community. And even though it's an individual right, it's also a collective right because it belongs to all us human beings. In what ways can human dignity guide us in finding solutions to threats? Threats to religious freedom and also to our social life, for example. Yes, as we were mentioning with Elena a few minutes ago, religious freedom, and you said it yourself a moment ago, the right to religious freedom is a fundamental right. What it seeks is precisely the development of the dignity of the human person. The dignity of the human person. It needs that spiritual and religious development to be complete. Therefore, protecting religious freedom is nothing other than giving value to the dignity of a human person. Nowadays, these modern positions practically want to tell us that a person is more dignified without religion. And that may be the case for some groups. That's not what we're discussing here, however. But I believe that for the overwhelming majority, religion, our faith, is what frames the way that we move through life. It's what frames our search for transcendence at a personal level, a family level, and a social level. And all of this is what makes us develop our dignity. So breaking away from that and taking a person's religious freedom away from them is going against their dignity. So I can't understand a modern position that it seeks to eliminate an important part of the dignity of a human being. That, by the way, in our country, Peru, would be the majority of people. So we must be very careful with these new trends that, through humanism and individual freedoms, of being able to do whatever you want, decide what you want to do with your life and with someone else's life. Because at this point, I'm able to decide not only for myself, but for someone else. How exactly does that make for greater human dignity? I think it goes against the development of a person's dignity. We've got to be very careful with these initiatives, these new humanistic trends that question the freedom of or that prioritize the freedom of the individual above others, above family, above society, above that spirituality, which is part of the overwhelming majority of people. Thank you very much. Any other comment? Yes, please. Thank you very much, Gary. Yes, in that regard, I agree with you when you said that there is a need for a common understanding of human dignity. This reminded me of a book some years ago by Francis Fukuyama on identity politics. Over the years, identity politics have been promoted, and this has led to a fragmentation or a weakening of this concept of human dignity to a degree. They were very good, but at some point, we have to recognize that we're living in a fragmented world, and in that sense, the gaps of inequality are becoming more and more entrenched. And this generates these inequalities or these gaps, which also generate anger. A little bit of what is mentioned in this book, in Pankaj Mishra's book, Age of Anger. Anger is understood as anger for recognition of dignity. Now, how do we understand human dignity? You mentioned this concept is central to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it remains so today. The issue is that we are facing a historic moment, I believe, not only because of the challenges that the pandemic is having us face, but because of progress in science and biotechnology. We are opening ourselves to an understanding of new, unexpected ways of understanding the human being and the possibilities in that regard. And I think that in that sense, it's a key challenge, right? How do we understand ourselves as human beings? And in that sense, what do these new challenges mean? What does protecting human dignity mean? And I think that human dignity uh, in recent years has been the foundation for a legal argument for contrary discussion. There are many cases throughout Latin America, but also in other countries, where human dignity was the basis upon which people argued contrary positions. What are the scopes of human dignity, the terms in this sense? So I think that there we've got a challenge, which is to say, what does it mean today? What do we understand today when we talk about the protection of human dignity? And I think that there is a lot to explore here, and the voice of the religion or religious organizations, of religious beliefs and faiths, is important because they start from an anthropology, from a conception of the human being, which precisely, as José was saying, is this transcendence of the human being that's being recognized. And in that regard, I think that they have to be listened to and they have to be given their position, their beliefs, and they need to be able to collaborate in this understanding of human dignity. Why? So that we can all live in the promotion or in uh, the encouragement of human flourishing. Thank you very much. Well, it's been a great pleasure for us to have you here, and we're going into the home stretch of our conversation. But I would very much like to close with your observations about the future. What do you expect? What would be the first steps to take in order to improve the situation? And how do you see the future? Are the challenges surmountable or insurmountable? Well, I'm going to let you speak, but I would very much like you to share your thoughts on these points. No, absolutely. We definitely we're obligated to believe that they are challenges that we can overcome. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We can overcome these obstacles. It's not easy at the present time. Uh, like Elena mentioned, with all this technological progress, with the presence of such extreme humanism, which seeks to govern life, the modern life of society. But although they're difficult, they are achievable. They can be overcome. It's important, I believe, that all religious entities in our countries, at least in Latin American countries, uh, bring together the overwhelming majority of societies, that they give their opinion on different matters. They should open up conversations and debates. There should be more symposiums, more congresses, a greater approach to the people when it comes to the importance of religious freedom for society, so that the governments out there know that there is a transcendent vision of the human being on one hand and the importance of religiosity on the other, so that we can all live together in freedom and harmony. No one is asking states to adopt a slew of measures in favor of anyone. Simply that religious freedom be recognized as a fundamental right. A fundamental right that, as you, Gary, just said a moment ago, was practically unanimously recognized in 1948. That is to say, for more than 70 years, it has, religious freedom has already been included in practically every political constitution all over the world. So we cannot ignore the fact that it must be further developed. And that is why it's important that all these institutions, which in some way are dedicated to the development of religious freedom, that we continue working hard so that this reaches more people, so that more professionals dedicate themselves to this area, this judicial branch, so that more people at a professional level understand that religious freedom must be defended from every order of ideas, and to generate awareness in our societies of the importance that this represents for the dignity of humankind, for the freedom of people, for the development of our families, and for the freedom and development of our peoples, to protect all fundamental rights, including religious freedom. Yes, I think there are, in my opinion, 3 steps that we could follow. Number one is to be able to recognize and give the importance that religious freedom deserves. That is to say, not leave it as all the way down number 5 on the priority list, but return it to the place it really deserves, because the risks that exist when religious freedom is restricted are very high. And perhaps we've not started to think about the fact that we need to protect this right and preserve it in our region. We're sort of still just working on prevention. That is to say, there isn't really a pressing threat, and that might be while we're still sort of asleep. But we need to wake up. We've got to get educated on the subject, and when we acquire that knowledge and that training, we have to start taking concrete steps. The law is not always going to guarantee respect for our rights, but it does educate our citizens and guides them by giving them guidelines to be able to do so. And then we, as a region, could begin to legislate on something in common. I mean, right now, we know that in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, there is a case being heard about religious freedom, and how nice it would be if all of us who are on this talk and who are going to be in this training could start following up on these things, putting our talents and knowledge to the service of protecting this. And if we could start to really come together, I think that a third step, in addition to giving this the importance it deserves and getting preparing ourselves, a third step could be acting together jointly, using those channels that we have as a Latin American region to be able to create a common front of people who are concerned for the respect of religious freedom, and change the rhetoric that exists around the idea that religious freedom is used to take advantage of any particular sphere or to restrict the rights of someone else, which is another of the challenges that we see in the region, as religious freedom has been presented as a tool to restrict the rights of others, or to attack or impose certain ways of thinking, to lead to a particular worldview. So, to be able to recognize the importance of religious freedom, be able to prepare ourselves and learn about this and unite, find the common value that unites us as a region, and be able to act as the group of human beings that we are and that we can access in order to protect our rights. Thank you very much. Yes, go ahead. Yes, the challenges truly are many, but we are not going to be discouraged in that sense. I think that we have, as José said, we have a huge horizon in front of us, and we are moving forward. And it really does have to do with training, education, growth, making known why the importance of religious freedom is a fundamental right, and how that is a part of man's dignity. In this sense, I believe that collaboration is also fundamental, not only among religious organizations, but also with other actors of civil society in coordination with governments. I think that even today, cooperation is becoming almost an obligation for the promotion of human dignity. So everything that can be done to create and develop mechanisms of or strategies, policies, good practices, best practices to generate the flourishing of human dignity is fundamental to be able to reduce the inequality gaps and promote the recognition of one another, and in which we all, one might say, you know, we're sort of all in the same boat. Like Pope Francis used to say, we're all in the same base. We're all in the same boat. Um, and once the storm is over, we all get out and go off on our own directions. But that's where we lose the sense of belonging, that we are together in a community, that we have a shared destiny. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We truly want to thank our distinguished panelists for their contributions today, for their comments, and we wish everyone success in their work in defense of religious freedom and in interfaith collaboration, as well as in every sense that upholds these values that are so universal, like human dignity. So, with that, we thank you all and conclude this session. Thank you very much.